The afternoon light in Leipzig has a peculiar quality, a golden haze that seems to suspend the city in amber, particularly when viewed from the terrace of the Café Franchise with a Riesling in hand. I wrote those words in 1938. I can see the sentence now, floating in the dark behind my eyelids, written in that pretentious, looping script I favored when I still believed I was an artist. I remember the smell of that paper, crisp, expensive, smelling faintly of the bindery. It is a difficult memory to hold when your nostrils are filled with the scent of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the distinct, copper-tasting intimacy of 3,000 men sweating in a ditch. I was 32 years old, crouched in the Russian earth, and I was not an artist. I was a recorder of lies, a stenographer for the graveyard. I often wonder, looking back from the safety of this decaying body, if I truly hated it then as much as I claim to now. Memory is a traitor, worse than any I ever saw executed. It edits the real. It crops the photograph. But I think the fear was real. It wasn't the fear of the Ivan on the other side of the ridge, though God knows that was there, a cold stone in the gut. No, my terror was smaller, sharper. It was the fear of the notebook in my pocket. It was the fear that my shorthand, those jagged little symbols I scratched out with such professional efficiency, would fail to be sufficiently heroic. That I would slip. That I would describe the mud as mud and not as hallowed ground. And that somewhere back in Leipzig, a black car would pull up to my house where my wife and daughter slept. The heat that July in the Kursk salient was an oppression. It wasn't just temperature. It was a physical weight, a humid blanket that pressed the air out of your lungs. The trench walls, reinforced with woven wicker that was already rotting, sweated moisture. We were in the staging area, the great pause before the hammer fell. Propaganda Kompanie 612. It sounds official, doesn't it? Like we were soldiers. But the men around me, the infantry, they looked at us with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. They wanted us to make them immortal, and they hated us for watching them die. I was cleaning my lens. A Leica IIIC, a beautiful machine, far more honest than the man holding it. I disassembled it with the blind familiarity of a lover, wiping the dust from the inner elements. The ritual was a shield. If I focused on the curvature of the glass, I didn't have to look at the faces of the boys sitting in the mud. Herr Kriegsberichter, I didn't look up. I blew a speck of dust from the viewfinder. Yes, would you take my likeness? For my mother, I looked up then. He couldn't have been more than 19. His tunic was too big in the shoulders, his helmet sitting slightly askew. He had the face of a baker's apprentice, soft and terrified, trying to harden himself into the Aryan ideal he'd seen on the posters I helped write captions for. The light is poor, I said. My voice sounded rusty. Please, I want her to see that I'm ready. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the tremor in his lower lip. I saw the dirt under his fingernails. I saw a boy who should be flirting with girls in a beer garden, not waiting to be chewed up by a T-34. Stand up, I said, sighing. Not like that. Chin up. Look at the horizon. No, don't squint. You are defending civilization against the Asiatic horde. Look like it. Well, he stiffened, puffing out his chest. It was pathetic. It was perfect. I dropped to one knee. The low angle, the hero's angle. It elongates the legs, broadens the chest, makes the subject look like a giant against the sky. I framed him against a patch of blue, carefully cropping out the latrine trench to his left and the soldier delousing his shirt to his right. I pressed the shutter. The mechanical snap was a precise, biting sound. I had just created a lie. I had turned a terrified boy into a warrior. If he died tomorrow, his mother would hold this photo and think he died fearless. I felt a wave of nausea so potent I had to swallow bile. Thank you, sir, he beamed. Go clean your rifle, I muttered, turning away. The order didn't come with a shout. It came as a ripple. You could feel it travel down the line. A change in the atmospheric pressure. The banter stopped. The card games vanished. Men checked their bolts. Operation Citadel. The grand pincer. The decisive blow. I uncapped my fountain pen. My hand was shaking. not from the anticipation of battle, but from the moral vertigo. I was about to witness the slaughter of thousands, and my only job was to find the adjectives to make it sound like a Wagner opera. I looked at the blank page. I couldn't finish the sentence. Then the world ended. It didn't begin with a sound. It began with a flash, a strobe light flickering across the entire eastern horizon, turning the night into a ghastly, bleached noon. The ground jumped. I mean that literally. The earth beneath my boots leaped upward 3 inches. And then the sound arrived. A roar that wasn't a noise, but a physical assault. A solid wall of pressure that slammed against the eardrums and vibrated the teeth in your skull. Thousands of artillery pieces, ours and theirs, opening the gates of hell simultaneously. The sky was no longer sky. It was a ceiling of fire. We moved out in the gray dawn, the artillery still thundering like a migraine that wouldn't break. I was in the back of a Hanomag half-track, wedged between a crate of ammunition and the SS liaison officer attached to our unit. Obersturmführer Kessler. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of soap, pale, smooth, and utterly devoid of friction. He spent the ride manicuring his fingernails with a small file, occasionally looking at my notebook. "Capture the scale, Richter," he shouted over the roar of the engine. "The irresistible momentum." I nodded, my pen hovering over the paper. I wrote the word in shorthand. It looked like a dying insect. To keep my sanity, I fell back on the discipline. The journalist's mantra. Observe, record, detach. I recited the details to myself, forcing the chaos into manageable data points. We crossed the line of departure. This was the threshold. Behind us was the relative sanity of the staging area, the maps, the logistics. Ahead was the zone, the place where geometry failed. The half-track lurched violently, throwing me against the metal siding. We were off the road now, tearing through a field of sunflowers that had been crushed into a yellow pulp by the treads of the Tiger tanks ahead of us. The noise changed texture. It wasn't just the distant thunder anymore. It was the close-range snap of high-velocity rounds, the tearing sound of machine gun fire, the demonic shrieking of the Nebelwerfer rockets, the Stalin's organs overhead. Out. Deploy, the ramp dropped. We spilled out into the smoke. The air was hot, searingly hot, filled with flying grit. "Richter, the Stuka." "Get the Stuka," Kessler was screaming, pointing skyward. A Ju-87 was diving on a Soviet bunker complex 300 meters ahead. It screamed, that terrifying siren wail designed to break the will. I raised the Leica. Through the viewfinder I saw the plane, a dark cross against the smoke. But in the bottom of the frame, 10 yards away, a medic was kneeling over a soldier whose legs had been turned to hamburger meat by a mortar shell. The medic was covered in bright arterial blood, screaming for plasma. "The Eagle, Richter. Ignore the casualty. Focus on the power." Kessler's voice was right in my ear, hysterical and commanding. I froze. The composition was right there. The dying man and the killing machine. The truth of the war in a single frame. The cause and the effect. "Take the damn picture." I shifted the lens up. I cut out the blood. I cut out the medic. I framed only the diving plane and the explosion of earth as the bomb struck. I pressed the shutter. A glorious victory. A clean war. I lowered the camera, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The medic was still screaming. We pushed forward. The advance was jerky, halting. I found myself next to a sergeant, a grizzled man with a scar running through his eyebrow. He saw me shaking. Without a word, he unhooked his canteen and handed it to me. I drank. The water was warm and tasted of tin, but it was the best thing I had ever tasted. He took the canteen back, winked, a slow, deliberate gesture in the middle of the apocalypse, and moved up. 2 hours later, we came across the carcass of a Panzer IV. It had taken a direct hit to the turret. The metal was still glowing dull red in places. The smell of roasting meat was overpowering, sweet and cloying, mixing with the sharp scent of burning rubber. "Here," Kessler said, stepping over a severed arm without looking down. "This is good. Sacrifice for the fatherland. Get a shot of the tank. It looks defiant. I looked at the tank. The commander was hanging halfway out of the hatch. He was charred black, his body frozen in a rictus of agony, hands clawing at the rim of the hatch he hadn't escaped. The body spoils the aesthetic, Kessler noted, frowning. Frame it from the low right. Use the hull to block the debris. He meant the man. I moved to the right. I knelt in the mud. I looked through the viewfinder. By positioning the barrel of the tank's gun in the foreground, I could obscure the burning corpse entirely. The image in the glass became a study in geometric shapes, a still life of steel and smoke. Heroic, somber, clean. I took the photo. I noted the aperture and shutter speed in my book. I didn't write down the name of the man melting inside it. The afternoon wore on, a blur of noise and heat. I filled 10 pages of my notebook. I changed film rolls 3 times. And then the shift happened. It wasn't a single moment, but a gradual accumulation of disaster. The radio chatter, which I was monitoring, turned from curt commands to panicked shouting. The horizon to our left, where the SS Panzer division was supposed to be breaking through, was a wall of black smoke. A runner stumbled into our crater. He had lost his helmet. His eyes were wide, white rims around pupils that had swallowed the iris. He grabbed the sergeant's tunic. "Mines," he gasped. "It's all mines. The elephants are stuck. They're picking them off like ducks." Kessler grabbed the runner by the collar. "Defeatist lies. The attack is proceeding according to plan. They're burning," the runner screamed, spraying spit. "Everyone is burning." The roar of the artillery redoubled, but now it was incoming. The ground erupted 50 yards away, showering us with dirt and hot metal. The illusion of the offensive, the grand narrative of the unstoppable German machine, shattered like a dropped lens. "Pull back," the cry came from the radio man, his voice cracking. "General retreat to line blue. All units." I looked at Kessler. For the first time, the soapstone smoothness of his face cracked. He looked at his notebook, then at the burning horizon, as if trying to find the regulation that prohibited this outcome. I looked at my own notebook. The ink was smeared with sweat and dirt. The lies I had written stared back at me, mocking. I snapped the book shut. "Write that down," I whispered to myself, the sound lost in the screaming of the shells. "Write down the retreat." But I knew I wouldn't. I would write about a strategic realignment. I would write about elastic defense. I would pack up my camera, turn my back on the burning boys, and carry the darkness back to the rear, safe inside my roll of film. The safety was an illusion, of course. There is no safety when the front collapses. The retreat was not a movement. It was a contagion. We flowed backward like poisoned blood, returning to a stopping heart. We ended up in a nameless village near the Dnieper. Just a skeleton of brick and timber. I sought shelter in the upper floor of a farmhouse that had been sheared in half by artillery. From the shadows, I could see the church courtyard below. It was quiet for a moment. The dust hung in the air like suspended flour. Then the trucks arrived. They were not Wehrmacht gray. They were camouflaged, filthy, carrying men whose eyes were hollowed out by too much killing. They didn't unload supplies. They unloaded anger. They dragged them out of the church cellar. 6 men, local villagers. They were old, wearing rough spun wool, their hands trembling. This was not combat. This was not the heroic struggle against Bolshevism I had typed up 1,000 times. This was murder. My hand moved before my mind could stop it. The shorthand of my youth, the reflex of the Leipzig court reporter, took over. I scribbled on the back of a map. 6 subject, hands behind heads. Unit markings obscured by mud. Officer screaming about partisans. I raised the Leica. The lens felt cold against my eye. I had 3 frames left. Frame 1, the lineup against the white church wall. Frame 2, the rifles raised. The smoke. Frame 3, the bodies on the stones. I lowered the camera. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had just committed treason. I had captured the reality behind the curtain. What heroic action are you documenting for the fatherland? Herr Richter, the voice came from the darkness behind me. I froze. I turned slowly. It was the SS liaison, Obersturmführer Mueller. He was leaning against a broken beam, his face a mask of calm amidst the ruin. He had to know. The camera in my hands weighed 1,000 kilos. If I spoke the truth, I died. If I lied, he would see it. The air between us stretched, tight as a piano wire. I opened my mouth to stammer a defense, to invoke the propaganda ministry, to beg. Then the world turned white. A Soviet mortar shell struck the courtyard below. The blast wave punched through the open wall of the farmhouse. It threw me backward into the debris. The floor dissolved. Darkness swallowed the question. I woke up covered in plastered dust, my ears ringing with a high, piercing whine. Mueller was gone or buried or retreating. I didn't look for him. I scrambled down the ruins, clutching my camera to my chest, and ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until the village was just a smudge of black smoke against the gray sky. I survived the retreat. I made it back to the command post at Gomel. They gave me a desk, a typewriter, and a bottle of schnapps. They told me to write the report on the sector's evacuation. I sat there for a long time. The paper was white and clean. My hands were filthy. In my pocket, the notebook with the shorthand scribbles burned against my thigh. The roll of film sat on the desk. A silent grenade. I began to type. The forces of Army Group Center conducted a strategic realignment, successfully repelling partisan agitation. Orderly withdrawal to prepared positions. I typed the words they wanted. I built the wall of lies. Brick by brick, sentence by sentence. I saved my skin. I saved my family in Leipzig. But with every keystroke, the writer in me died. The man who believed that journalism was a torch to light the dark corners of the world was gone. I became a mechanic of deception. My typewriter was no longer a tool of creation. It was a machine that processed human suffering into patriotic pulp. I kept the photos. I kept the notebook. They are in a tin box now, in a drawer that smells of lavender and old guilt. I am an old man. The Reich is dust. The Greater Germany is a scar on the map of history. But I have the truth. I look at the photo of the church wall. It is blurry, grainy, but the horror is sharp. I was a coward who wrote lies to live, but I preserved the truth so it could survive me. The ink I used back then was not ink. It was a shroud. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.